Hello and welcome to another In Conversation with WLV Doctoral College. I'm Dr. Deborah Curitan and I work in research development at the University of Wolverhampton.
And I'm Dr. Ben Halligan. I'm Director of the Doctoral College.
Today we're talking about making applications for research degrees, and as part of a series of vlogs that we're doing, we're going to look at how to use the existing literature in your application and some tips and hints around how to access that literature. So what we're planning to do is we're planning to cover the function of the existing literature and why you would use it, what we expect from you in terms of how you use that literature, how to access existing literature, and we're going to finish with a few tips. So Ben, to the first of those. Why do we expect postgraduate researchers or prospective postgraduate researchers to provide information about the area from the existing literature?
Well, we would like to know that they are familiar with writing, with thought, with ideas that are already kicking around in the area that they're wanting to look at. And when I say familiar, I don't mean deeply familiar. It may be that they're aware that there are a series of articles or a book. They've not actually managed to study those in depth yet, but these existing pieces of literature illustrate, number one, that the applicant is aware of work in this area, but number two, that work is going on in this area and that the proposed research could be considered in the context of existing literature. So it's to really reassure the people looking at your application that as an applicant, you are aware that other people have been developing ideas and that you would like to develop some ideas in tandem with, complementary to, countering these other ideas that are in the field. Where we have applications that don't illustrate any awareness of this, we slightly worry that if the applicant isn't aware, then they may wind up trying to research an area which has already been very thoroughly researched, or in a way it's already been very thoroughly researched. Very typically, for somebody who's applying for doctoral research straight from a master's, they would already be quite familiar with the literature which they might have used for a final year, a final project in their master's. So often it would just be a matter of reusing that bibliography.
And again, that's the case with maybe a dissertation at undergraduate, because people can make an application with a first or a 2-1 at undergraduate level. So what do we expect in terms of word length, in terms of depth of analysis, synthesis, critique?
I would say the easiest way of doing it may be to have a primary literature list, which could need only 4 or 5 items, and then maybe a secondary literature list, again with 4 or 5. We don't need a lot. And it would be enough, I think, in the application to say, you know, I would suggest that my work might build on the work of these other people in these articles in this book, or alternatively, in these articles or this book, I think they've missed something out quite important, which I would like to begin to research and fill in the gaps. Or alternatively, you could say, you know, there really isn't that much existing literature. Here's the little that has been located. And to me, that suggests that people are not looking at this important area. There's an opportunity, therefore, for me to come in and to say something that hasn't been said again. So with respect to the research proposal itself, typically people would say, you know, the research builds on the foundation of the work of X and Y. I want to use some of their concepts to further them maybe in a different way. Please see suggested bibliography at the bottom of the research proposal. And then the primary reading, the secondary reading, not very much. I mean, you know, certainly there'll be stuff that you've missed out. Certainly there'll be stuff only just published that you're not aware of. But as part of the support that we offer you in putting an application together, that will be a conversation point with potential supervisors as we prepare your application, the research proposal element of it with you. And part of the conversation of the interview, we will be talking about existing literature. And then once you begin, one of the first tasks really will be to build up a complete literature list, a bibliography, So we don't need it perfect, we don't need it complete, but we do need a sort of indication to assure us that you're aware of existing literature in the area.
So it's focusing in on the key arguments as opposed to doing a full literature review at this point. That will come later.
Yeah, and you don't really need to have read all of this in depth. I mean, articles will have abstracts, which are summaries. So you may be somewhat familiar, but not, enormously familiar. And we wouldn't necessarily expect you to be at this point.
So that takes us on to the next point of, for some people, it's difficult to access articles. So if you're in the process of doing the degree, when you make your application, either undergraduate or master's, you will have access to various databases through the university that you're studying at. But if you've finished education, you've taken a bit of a gap and you're coming back to education, that access is more difficult. So how might people access some of the papers and the most recent work out there?
Exactly as you say. So if you're a current student, you can hit a library, you can do the standard literature review search through the database, and you should be able to get stuff fairly quickly. Not only that, but probably the research that you've been doing, the work you've been doing as a current student will be flagging up bits of literature to you that you can use. But what about that applicant who's outside this, who maybe is coming back after a couple of years, who won't have a student account and therefore doesn't have library access? Well, there are a few things you can do. Google Scholar is a very useful website that just basically will search all academic literature, and you can set the parameters, for example, by year, so you can look at stuff within the last couple of years. You can search by keywords, so that's quite useful as well, and that will very quickly deliver a number of links to journal articles, to books, which you can then begin to compile into a bibliography. So that's one way forward that's quite straightforward. Another way is, I think, in just generally using Google or a search engine to find information about the area that you're studying. You may also come across other people who've done PhDs in this or in parallel areas, and you can download those. Every university, including Wolverhampton, has an electronic archive. And what's very interesting there is the bibliographies of those PhDs, which may be 5,000 words or so, maybe several pages. But nonetheless, you'll have a bibliography, and you can quickly go through it, and it will reveal some articles, some books that you think, aha, this looks like it's something that could be quite relevant to my research. So you can again put that into your proposed reading list. So there are two tips: Google Scholar and looking at other people's PhDs.
And then along with the university electronic archives, there's also the British Library as well. So the British Library have an archive of every PhD, every doctorate in the UK. So that's available to people via Ethos. And also a lot of journals are open access these days, so people can access journal articles straight from particular journals. And not forgetting ResearchGate, where people often publish their work, and that will include work that's both published but in a pre-published state, or work that hasn't been published, what we call the grey literature. And again, that's useful to draw on, isn't it?
It is, and you make a good point there about journals, actually, where we're looking for quality literature. So it would be journals of, so academic publications as well in terms of books, university presses, things like this. While it's fine to cite, say, more journalistic stuff to show general interest in the area, we would be looking for the literature to reveal academic engagements with the subject at hand. So I'd look for some quality established journals, and I would be citing those.
Brilliant, thank you. So shall we conclude with some tips, Ben?
Yeah, tip number one is don't think you need to be complete. I mean, I've talked about two lists with maybe 5 items on each, and that's it. Know that we will be building this up as we move it forward. So don't worry at this point if you've not got everything, just enough to indicate where you're coming from.
And my 2 tips will be first of all, look for key authors in the area and maybe search them. You will often be able to access some of their papers and their literature via their university websites. And also have a look at the work of the academics in Wolverhampton if you're applying to us, who are working in the area, and cite them as well, because they potentially could be your supervisors. So thank you for listening. As always, it's lovely to speak to you, and we'll speak to you again soon. Okay, bye.
Hiya.